Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Bernstein, Chairman, United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
Good evening and welcome, and a special welcome to Marion Wiesel, Alicia Wiesel, the Wiesel family, and distinguished guests. We're gathered here in this institution to honor the memory of an extraordinary man. The museum's very existence and all that it stands for stems from the exceptional vision of Elie Wiesel. It is an astonishing achievement and an astonishing life that we celebrate today. It was almost 40 years ago when President Carter appointed Elie Wiesel to chair a commission to explore the idea of creating an American memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. Ellie described the work of the President's Commission as awesome and forbidding, a task which required reaching far back into the past, as well as taking a hard look into the future. He was acutely aware that the proposed museum in the capital of the free world needed to make Holocaust memory a transformative force for change. It was a bold proposal. Ellie never hesitated to be bold in what he called the most important project of my life. For Ellie, the museum would be a place of transformation where history and memory would inspire reflection and action. Ellie said, "A memorial unresponsive to the future would violate the memory of the past." He demonstrated that conviction on the museum's opening day when he confronted the newly elected President Clinton. And as he invoked the world's abandonment of his own mother, Ellie called on the president to respond to the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. Today, as we witness the horrific crimes in Syria, the greatest humanitarian catastrophe since the Holocaust, Ellie's moral voice, his call to action, is sorely needed. Ellie is gone, but his vision and moral compass will always guide and challenge us. Once, when asked by his students what would happen when there were no survivors left to tell the story, Ellie replied, "Just think, perhaps you are the only hope I have. Fulfill it." Every day, this museum strives to honor his legacy by educating the public on the lessons of history and the museum's biggest lesson: the Holocaust was preventable. Another lesson is that the promise of never again has yet to be fulfilled. As we speak, the crimes of Syria and ISIS rage on. We have lost a giant of our times. A great voice has been silenced. But if Ellie were here, he would admonish each of us to use our voice. In his words, "Killers always have more power than their victims, but we too have power, the power of conscience." The best way to honor Ellie is for each of us to use that power today and every day. Thank you.
The Honorable Samantha Power, United States Permanent Representative to the United Nations and a member of President Obama's cabinet.
Thank you. Words tend to fail us most in two circumstances: in the face of profound evil and in the face of transcendental decency. When Elie Wiesel tried initially to describe his experience in the camps, he later wrote, "I watched helplessly as language became an obstacle." We who have the honor to speak about Ellie have the opposite challenge, finding words that capture the fierce and magical essence of this marvelous man. Ellie gave friendship with the intensity of a young man fresh out of college, with innocence and adamant conviction that that friendship will be an eternal bond, which in Ellie's case, it usually was. He used to quote someone who said in French, "Ma patrie, c'est les amis." My fatherland is my friends. Ellie added, the only cult I really worship in and believe in is friendship. Well, beloved Ellie, your cult is out in force tonight. The miracle that I would like to explore briefly tonight is that of Elie Wiesel's joyfulness. Before I do, of course, we must consider the context from which that joy somehow emerged. None of us will ever comprehend the depravity of what Ellie experienced during the Holocaust. He tried to help us see and feel that pain, but he knew our limits. Most of us also cannot fathom the aloneness that Ellie experienced after he was liberated from Buchenwald on April 11, 1945. Imagine the 16-year-old boy who walked out of those gates, a boy with A7713 tattooed on his arm, a boy who, as far as he knew, had lost his entire family, and who, when he gazed at himself in the mirror for the first time since being sent to the concentration camp, saw a corpse staring back at him. The slightest wind would turn me over, he later said. Many of us have been struck by the fact that it took Ellie 10 years to ready himself, to try to put into words the horrors of what had been done to him and to his family and his people. A whole 10 years before he could begin to write. And when he did so in the spring of 1955, this wise old man who had been to hell and back was just 26 years old. What would it have been like for this man in his Paris apartment to drudge it all up, to rouse the demons, to hear what he called the silent cries? While I had many things to say, he would later write, I did not have the words to say them. How was one to rehabilitate and transform words betrayed and perverted by the enemy? Hunger, thirst, fear, transport, selection, fire, chimney. I would pause at every sentence and start over and over again. I would conjure up other verbs, other images, other silent cries. It still was not right. He re-immersed himself in that period into the darkness of the night. The approach that came most naturally to him was blunt and unsparing. What he bore witness to and thus relived were the horrors inflicted upon him, but also his own most searing moments of dehumanization, when he could not bring himself to help the person whose companionship had helped keep him alive in Auschwitz and later on the death march, his father. As he wrote later, he had called out to me and I had not answered. In the original text, which Ellie wrote in Yiddish, he had added, I shall never forgive myself. Elie Wiesel carried all of this, gathered here in a museum dedicated to educating people about the systematic effort to eradicate the Jewish people, a museum built upon the testimonies of thousands of survivors, and in whose foundation are etched Ellie's words, for the dead and the living we must bear witness. Sitting here, it can be hard to imagine that there was a time when the prevailing wisdom was not to bear witness. But that is precisely what it was like when Ellie was writing. Survivors did not speak about their past even to their own children. Here in the United States, there were no memorials to the 6 million Jews who had been killed. The word Holocaust did not even appear in the New York Times until 1959. Even in Europe, where the mass murder had taken place and entire Jewish communities had been wiped out, the topic was hardly mentioned. It was against this wall of silence that Ellie wrote. And then the man whose life's mission would be to combat indifference laid his heart out to the world, presented his experiences, his story, and they reacted with indifference. Although he had cut the original Yiddish version from more than 800 pages to a little more than 100, as we all know, all the major publishing houses turned the book down. The renowned French novelist Francois Mauriac tried to help Elie. No one is interested in the death camps anymore, publishers told Mauriac. It just won't sell. When Elie went in search of an American publisher, he later recalled their rejection letters often noted that American readers, quote, seemed to prefer optimistic books, end quote. All who have read Night are haunted, perhaps above all, by Moshe the Beetle. Moshe was among the first wave of foreign Jews deported from Elie's town of Siget, Hungary, who were transported by train to a forest in Poland, where they were forced to dig their own graves at gunpoint and then executed en masse by the Gestapo. Moshe survived, wounded, faking his death, and eventually made his way back to Siget, where he told his neighbors what he had witnessed. Jews, listen to me, he yells outside the synagogue, weeping. That's all I ask of you. No money, no pity, just listen to me. But no one listens. Moshe is ignored, dismissed as a madman. How cruel was it then that young Elie Wiesel, who was taunted by his perpetrators, that nobody would ever know or care what had happened to him and his people, how cruel was it that he encountered a world that, again, didn't seem to care what he had gone through? When he was hawking that manuscript, did he feel somehow like Moshe the Beetle, a man who possessed the truth but was ignored? And yet, none of this appears to have tamed the determination or even the spark and sparkle in and of Elie Wiesel. Night, of course, did eventually find its publishers, and after several years, its readership did begin to grow, at first gradually and then exponentially. Indeed, arguably no single work did so much to puncture the silence that had previously enveloped survivors and bring what happened in the night out into the light for all to see. And yet, injustice was still all around. Genocide denial against the Armenians, the horrors of his lifetime, Pol Pot, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, Syria, in his later years. He lived to see more and more people bear witness to unspeakable atrocities, but he also saw indifference remained too widespread. Amid all the pain and disappointment of Ellie's remarkable life, how is it that the darkness did not envelop him or shield him from the sun? How is it that the twinkle in Elie Wiesel's eye was every bit as defining as his life's experiences? What is normal? What is abnormal, Elie once told Oprah Winfrey, is that I am normal. That I survived the Holocaust and went on to love beautiful girls, to talk, to write, to have toast and tea, and live my life. That is what is abnormal. Elie raged against indifference to injustice, to be sure, but he also savored the gifts of life with ferocious zeal. We know that every moment is a moment of grace, he once said. Every hour is an offering. Not to share them would mean to betray them. Maybe it was because Elie had such a strong sense of purpose on his journey, to help those who could still be helped, a duty to his neighbor, to the stranger that he once was. He called it his 11th commandment, thou shalt not stand idly by. You must speak up, you must defend, you must tell the victims, you are not alone, somebody cares. Through the years, Elie ventured out to the most unlikely, isolated places. There was Elie in a tiny village along the Thai border with Cambodia, meeting with refugees who had just escaped the Khmer Rouge. There was Elie crossing the jungle in Nicaragua on foot and in a kayak to reach the Mosquito Indians who had been driven from their land. I, Elie reflected later, who have been known to lose my way in my own neighborhood and don't know how to swim, traveled all that way to bear witness to their displacement and see how he could help. Now, one might think that in these encounters, Elie found only suffering, but he did not. He found meaning. Abe Foxman remembered visiting a school program in Tel Aviv that Elie and Marion had helped set up for undocumented children, one of many such initiatives they created. And Abe remembers seeing Elie singing and dancing with the kids in pure, almost childlike joy. Elie Wiesel often wrote of the anger within him, but what he projected most effortlessly was his love. Jews, Elie would often say, are a people of unparalleled gratitude. So much so, he pointed out, that they begin the day by thanking God for opening their eyes. Elie's greatest joy came in the time with the people closest to him, especially Marion, Alicia, Elijah, and of course, others here today. A few years ago, when he was recovering from heart surgery, Elie was visited by his beloved grandson, Elijah, then just 5 years old. Here is how Elie described the encounter. I hug my grandson and I tell him, every time I see you, my life becomes a gift. Elijah observes me closely as I speak and then responds, Grandpa, you know that I love you and I see you are in pain. Tell me, if I loved you more, would you be in less pain? Elie writes, I am convinced God at that moment is smiling as he contemplates his creation. I am so very sad that my children will not have the chance to talk metaphysics with the Master. But before I close, let me offer another reason that God is smiling today. As our nation goes through difficult days, Night is a book that is firmly ingrained in that small canon of literature that kids and young adults read when they are growing up in America. Alongside Atticus Finch and Scout, one of the narrators that will have an early shot at shaping our children's moral universe is 16-year-old Ellie. So while the void is enormous, above all for Marion, Alicia, Elijah, and the void is enormous for our world, I too am filled with profound joy knowing that my 7-year-old boy and my 4-year-old girl, like Ellie's grandkids and their children after them, will wade into big questions for the first time with Elie Wiesel as their guide, that they will be less alone for having Ellie with them, that Night will be one of the works that lays the scaffolding for their moral architecture, all because Elie Wiesel was optimistic enough to keep going and to find the strength to shine his light on us all. Thank you.
The world has lost one of humanity's most remarkable individuals. Our institution lost its founding father. In 2011, 5 presidents participated in a moving tribute to Ellie as he received the museum's highest honor, subsequently named the Elie Wiesel Award. It's a powerful testament to his enduring legacy. Ellie is gone, but his vision and moral compass will always guide and challenge us.
Nobody would have imagined that such a crime could be conceived and implemented. Memory, if it is not shared and filled with meaning to teach future generations, it would be stifled.
Here on the town square of our national life, we dedicate the United States Holocaust Museum and so bind one of the darkest lessons in history to the hopeful soul of America.
In 1978, I established a presidential commission to recommend an appropriate memorial. To serve as chairman, I asked Elie Wiesel. Elie led the commission on visits to sites in Europe. It inspired an extraordinary vision. I remember Elie calling it a living memorial.
And that's what we're here for, to lay the cornerstone for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which will help us understand and make it impossible for us to forget.
The Holocaust Museum was a project under discussion during much of my public service. When Ellie has an idea, it's always a big idea, dealing with some of the most important aspects of the human condition.
Just a few months after I took office, on a very chilly, rainy day, I spoke about the importance of the museum on the National Mall. But it was Ellie who made us all think about the importance of the museum, not just in the context of our collective memory, but in shaping our shared future.
And Mr. President, I cannot not tell you something. I have been in the former Yugoslavia. I cannot sleep since of what I have seen. We must do something to stop the bloodshed in that country.
Ellie understood that memory alone was not enough. That the combination of memory and education was imperative to learn the lessons and deepen our humanity. We thank Ellie for his constant reminder that we should promote human dignity, however it's threatened.
Elie Wiesel.
Never shall we allow them to feel abandoned, for then we would betray them and ourselves.
Ellie always says that indifference is the greatest problem, and he worked to make it impossible for the world to turn a blind eye to evil.
Mr. Ambassador, do not wait for Sudan's invitation or consent. If they give it, good. If not, go in anyway.
The words "never again" refer not to the past, but to the future.
Our grief and our outrage over what happened have not diminished. I will not forget what I have seen here today.
Ellie, it was almost 2 years ago when we stood together at Buchenwald and you told me your story of suffering and tragedy, of strength and of hope. Like so many of your fellow survivors, you carry with you the memory of the horrors you endured and the loved ones you lost. But your gift has always been your ability to share that memory and to remind each of us of our responsibility to stand up to injustice wherever we find it.
When Ellie was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, he was described as a messenger to mankind, a passionate witness to humanity's capacity for the worst, and a powerful example of humanity's capacity for the best.
I know I speak for millions the world over in expressing my great admiration for this remarkable man who has contributed so much to humanity.
I thank Elie Wiesel for his courage. I appreciate his leadership in the establishment of the Holocaust Museum on our National Mall.
As we stood at Buchenwald, you said, "Memory has become the sacred duty of all people of goodwill." It's a duty we all share, to bear witness, but also to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. Thank you, Ellie, for showing us the way.
The Honorable Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic Leader.
Members of Congress are afforded many honors in our service to our country. I'm sure, Senator Hatch, ambassadors, Chair, Madam Chair, that we all appreciate the special occasions that we have to rub elbows with greatness. But as a member of Congress, and I know I speak for my colleagues, I can't think of anything that would compare to the honor of speaking at a memorial service for Elie Wiesel here in the Holocaust Museum. Elie Wiesel was one of the noblest souls and the most important voices of integrity and conscience that ever lived, a survivor whose words and deeds have bravely, beautifully preserved the memory of millions silenced in humanity's great, great crime. Elie Wiesel found words for an experience that seemed almost beyond comprehension and beyond language. His wrenching articulation of the kingdom of night fills a role that no mere history could ever could. Thanks to Elie Wiesel's words, even as the living memory of some Holocaust passes, future generations will be able to reckon with its vast horror and with its rawness and urgency. Many of us remember, and we saw in this film, speaking of honors, to follow such a beautiful film of presidents honoring Elie Wiesel. Many of us remember that rainy day that President Clinton was speaking of in 1963, when Ellie spoke at the dedication of this very museum and explained the meaning of his words inscribed on the edifice: "For the dead and the living, we must bear witness." For not only are we responsible for the memories of the dead, he emphasized, we are also responsible for what we are doing with those memories. Time and again, Elie Wiesel challenged and awakened the conscience of humanity, not only in confronting the legacy of the Holocaust, but in spotlighting the horrors of apartheid, of the Bosnian massacres, as he referenced that rainy, rainy day, and many of you were here when he departed from the dedication focus to the real dedication focus, and of Rwanda, but anywhere else people were persecuted and were suffering. We will surely miss his brazen moral candor in the years to come. In some ways, our nation finds itself at a crossroads in history with no small amount of uncertainty and anxiety about the road ahead. Though he is not here to give us guidance in person, I recall the moral charge he gave in the Capitol building in 2009 during our Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony. You remember that? In the presence of President Barack Obama. Every day, he said, it is incumbent upon us to choose anew between deadly warfare among adults and the right of children to grow up without fear, with a smile on their face, between ugly hatred and the nobility of opposing it, between inflicting pain and humiliation and inventing a beginning of solidarity and hope. Those are words for all of us to live and to lead by. In Elie Wiesel's name and in the names of millions he helped to give voice to, let us always look to the dreams of our children. Let us always stand bravely against the darkness of hate. Let us work every day to come together and invent a new beginning of solidarity and hope. Another occasion when Elie was at the Capitol was he came, now how is this for an honor? He came to the remembrance ceremony to introduce Justice Breyer. Justice Breyer, you're a great man, but to have Elie Wiesel come and introduce you, that must be just the most thrilling event of your life. And Elie spoke so beautifully, and the justice spoke about how the horror came to fore under the laws in Germany. But anyway, Elie hearkened us to be ever vigilant and cautious. Marion, how he loved you, how he loved his whole family, how he glowed when he spoke of you. Alicia, Lynn, and Elijah, how beautifully the ambassador spoke about you and your interaction with your grandfather. Thank you for sharing this extraordinary man with the world. I hope it is a comfort to you that the whole world mourns your loss. Thank you for the privilege of participating in this remembrance of Elie Wiesel. Thank you.
The Honorable Orrin Hatch, President pro tempore of the Senate.
I am deeply honored to be here at this memorial to speak about the life and the legacy of a friend and really a personal hero. Few today can imagine the horrors that Ellie experienced, and even fewer can understand the resolve in this face of evil that he had to put up with. Through his singular courage, Ellie became a harbinger of hope and an inextinguishable light in a world of darkness. Whether you knew him when you were young or old, Ellie taught each of us how to make a lasting impact. He helped us see the value of helping others. All of us gathered here have read his words. We've heard his voice, but most importantly, we have felt his spirit. Today, we come from near and far to remember the warmth, the sympathy, the empathy, and the humility of Ellie. My friendship with Ellie began when we served together on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council. His quiet leadership and profound passion kept us anchored in our love of humanity and a hope for an even better tomorrow. The world we live in today would benefit more from Ellie's love. Anti-Semitism continues to be a global threat. Israel is under constant peril, and the rising tides of hatred beckon at our doors still. With evil on the march, people all too often retreat into seclusion, hiding from their differences. But in the face of growing discord, Ellie taught us to do the opposite. He taught us to embrace our differences, to cherish them. He taught us to celebrate our collective strength and channel our commonalities to fight the waves of prejudice that really leap at our shores. Ellie didn't just teach those principles or these principles, he lived them. Indeed, Ellie's love for his fellow man enabled him to endure the horrors of the Holocaust with his humanity completely intact. Today, his writing is as relevant as ever. So too is his warning about the duality of man. Just as the good in each of us can triumph, so too can the evil. Only by resisting our baser impulses and hearkening to the better angels of our nature can we keep the darkness at bay. I will personally miss Ellie. I will miss his earnestness. I will miss his pensive glances and his mastery of language and his example. His example continues, though. Most of all, I will miss his optimism in the times of uncertainty. Ellie found light in the shadows. He was a leader like no other, and to borrow a Yiddish word, a true mensch. I pray that we all have his strength to build a community founded on peace and blessed by grace. Memory is both a gift and a burden. Remembrance enlivens the soul, yet it also recalls hardship. Ellie taught us all not to shrink from the obligations that bind us to our memories. To borrow his words, because I remember, I despair. Because I remember, I have the duty to reject despair. I wear a mezuzah. I've worn one for pretty close to 40 years. I put it on every day and wear it every day as a constant reminder of my obligation and my love for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel. Elie Wiesel was more than a mezuzah. He was an inspiration to all of us, including all of us members of Congress. I don't know that I've ever met anybody who had his humanity come through as much as Elie Wiesel. I've met some wonderful people over the years. So I'm happy that you're honoring him tonight, and I'm really honored to have been able to say a few words on his behalf and his family's behalf. Elisha and Mrs. Wiesel and others who may be here, I'm very grateful for the sacrifices you have made as well. And all I can say is, may God bless us all. Thanks so much.
The Honorable Ron Dermer, Ambassador of Israel to the United States.
Chairman Bernstein, Senator Hatch, Minority Leader Pelosi, and other members of Congress, Ambassador Power, Ambassador Mayor, and my fellow diplomats, and above all, the Wiesel family and the survivors, the living witnesses who have come here to remember the most famous witness of all. Elie Wiesel was a great man. He was great not because of the indefatigable work, his indefatigable work to memorialize the Holocaust. He was great not because of his prodigious talents as a writer or his profound wisdom as a thinker. He was great not because of his sublime character, which somehow combined the dignity of nobility with the humility of a person of the deepest faith. Elie Wiesel was certainly all of these things. He was a man of many, many virtues. But what made Elie Wiesel truly great was that he possessed the one virtue that Winston Churchill said made all the other virtues possible: courage. And Elie Wiesel's courage was the courage to speak truth to power. Ladies and gentlemen, we are admonished never to forget. But to never forget evil is not enough. We must also fight evil. And that fight requires more than memory. It requires courage. It requires the ability to use whatever power or influence we have to confront evil. Dr. Martin Luther King famously said that the arc of history bends towards justice. I hope that statement is true. But one thing I am certain of is that if that arc does indeed bend towards justice, it does not bend on its own. It is bent by people like Dr. King and Elie Wiesel, by giants who serve in their generation as the conscience of mankind. We live in a world where too many good people find too many ways to justify silence and inaction in the face of evil. They convince themselves that now is not the time to trade in their status, power, and influence. They delude themselves into thinking that these valuable commodities must be hoarded so that they can be marshaled to do even greater good in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, Elie Wiesel had been too close to evil to fall prey to such dangerous illusions. He knew that these commodities are only valuable if they are spent in time. He knew that the failure to speak and act against evil would both strengthen evil and corrode the soul. Like the prophet Nathan, who rebuked the beloved King David, like the prophet Elisha, who rebuked the wicked king Jehoram, and like other prophets of the Jewish people, Elie Wiesel was the great rebuker of our time. 23 years ago, as you heard tonight, he stood here at the opening of this very museum and pleaded with President Clinton to do something, anything, to stop the bloodshed in the former Yugoslavia. A decade earlier, he told President Reagan, that his place was not at Bitburg. And early last year, Elie Wiesel sat in a gallery of Congress to listen to the Prime Minister of the one and only Jewish state speak about a threat to the survival of Israel. Sometimes people listened to Elie, sometimes people didn't, but Elie always spoke. For him, party never trumped principle. Friendship never provided absolution. And status was never an excuse for silence. What mattered to him was the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it was for him to speak or for us to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, as an ambassador of Israel who had the privilege of meeting this giant among men, there is one more thing I wish to say today. Elie Wiesel was both a man of the world and a man of his people, someone who realized, as precious few do, that to be a man of the world, you must first and foremost be a man of your people. I will always be there for Israel, he would tell me each and every time we spoke or we met. And Elie Wiesel was always there. He was always there for Israel. He was always there for the Jewish people. He was always there for all people. So let us remember this great man today, a man who witnessed so much darkness and yet spread so much light, a man who saw the most twisted timber of humanity, but possessed a courage and clarity that pierced through like the straightest of arrows, a man who was a proud son of Israel and who made all of Israel proud. May the memory of Elie Wiesel never be forgotten and always be blessed. Yehi zichro baruch.
Yitzhak Perlman with Rohan de Silva.
When I was asked to play at this memorial, I was thinking what would be the appropriate piece to do. And in all this darkness of the Holocaust, there were a few bright spots, and I think this would be appropriate. It's the theme from the movie Schindler's List.
The Honorable George Cristian Mayor, Ambassador of Romania to the United States.
It's hard to speak after this magical music, but I will try. I am particularly honored and humbled to present this tribute to Elie Wiesel. Like all of you, I am here to pay homage to the life and legacy of a man who meant so much to humanity. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust witness and survivor, relentless advocate for freedom, dignity, and peace, messenger to mankind. Through his experience and testimony of the Holocaust and his lifetime service on behalf of the oppressed, Elie Wiesel educated the world about the importance of remembering and inspired us to have faith in the resilience and strength of the human spirit. Born in Romania, he was one of the hundred thousands of Jews deported from Sighet in that fateful month of May 1944. Many of them perished, including Ellie's younger sister and parents. May their souls rest in peace and be blessed in eternity. But Ellie's call was to live, to bear witness to the most extreme tragedy of the humanity, to make sure that justice prevails and that the memory of the Holocaust will live forever in the conscience of the coming generations, so no one ever remains impassible and indifferent to another's harms and injustice. And how forceful he was in answering this call. His work at the museum and through the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity has had an immeasurable impact around the world. His teaching and writing have become universal bridges to understanding the pain of the Holocaust. His legacy is so encompassing and transforming, yet so uniquely personal, so that all those who have been touched by it now know what the name Elie Wiesel stands for. An important part of his work has been to determine the truth about the Holocaust in Romania and to reassure the Jews there and elsewhere that they were not abandoned, that the memories of their families and the tragedies they had gone through were not lost, ignored, or worse, rewritten. As a Romanian, I have the privilege to remind this audience of his work in Romania. Elie Wiesel's legacy in my country is important not only because of his gentle embrace of Romania as his native land, but indeed for the powerful and transformative way in which his story, his dignified and principled call for truth, and his commitment to justice have shaped Romania as a nation. Romania embraced Elie Wiesel as well and wanted to hear his call to change and to reconcile with its past, to remember and to honor. The work of the International Commission for the Study of the Holocaust in Romania, chaired by Elie Wiesel, has become a turning point in Romania's efforts to understanding its history, with undeniably far-reaching consequences for the future of our nation. On November 11, 2004, Elie Wiesel, in his message at the presentation of the Commission's final report, said this: "For us, this was our sacred mission, to honor truth by remembering the dead. For them, it is too late, but not for their children and ours." Following the endorsement of the Commission's report in 2004, Romania started to make consistent steps towards honoring the truth, and it educated our children about the Holocaust. October 9 has been declared a National Day of Holocaust Commemoration. The day is observed each year across the country and has become an important landmark in our collective reference to our past. On this day, for the past 10 years, meaningful programs and institutions have been seen the light of day. The Elie Wiesel National Institute for the Study of the Holocaust in Romania, the Holocaust Victims Memorial in Bucharest, the kick-off of a new Museum of Holocaust and Jewish History in Romania, and very telling, the dedication in October this year of the Elie Wiesel Memorial Plaza in central Bucharest, a perennial recognition of his existence as a gift to humanity. On one of his visits to his native Sighet in 2002, to witness the dedication of his memorial home, Elie's advice to the Romanian participants was a simple one: do not turn your back on the past. I would like to take a moment as we look at Elie Wiesel's legacy in Romania and thank so many of you, most notably Ellie's family, but also members of the United States Congress, leadership and staff of the museum, leaders of the American Jewish organizations, and many other American friends who, like him, believed in the power of truth and encouraged us to embrace the immense transformational value that it could bring to our society. I would like to close by quoting a passage from Ellie's book, Night, so many times mentioned here. Never shall I forget that nocturnal silence which deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments which murder my God and my soul and turn my dreams to dust. Never shall I forget these things, even if I am condemned to live as long as God himself. Never, and never shall we forget Elie Wiesel. Thank you.
Elie Wiesel.
When the moment comes, my father told me a year ago, you will find specific instructions. You will find all the things that need to be taken care of, all the things I want you to know. He didn't tell me what those last wishes were, and I didn't ask. I wasn't ready to contemplate it. I wanted him to focus on living, not dying, but he gave me the combination to his safe, and I wrote it down. After my father died, I looked everywhere for these instructions. There was no message, not one that I could find. Not in his safe, not in the files in his computer, not in the papers in his desk drawers. So I looked for his message in the weekly Torah, or Bible readings. My father asked me to say Kaddish for him, so I spend a lot of time in shul these days. And I find him there. I see him in the great figures of Jewish history who fired his own imagination as both child and adult. Yaakov, Jacob, the man who wrestled with God. Yitzchak, Isaac, the child who walked off the sacrificial altar. And Avraham, most of all, Abraham, a man of profound humility who tirelessly set the standard for devotion to God, and through it, kindness to his fellow man. I see myself, together with my father, in the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, a story of a father and son, perhaps the story of a father and son. And as Yitzchak's life hangs in the balance, while his father and God test each other, so too does mine. Abraham is a man who has seen entire cities destroyed by a judging God. And as he binds his own son, he contemplates the end of his line. My father saw his whole world consumed by flames. He cannot contemplate bringing another Jewish child into being. Can you feel my fate hang in the balance as man and God judge each other and all of creation? Up on the mountain, the knife will be raised over Yitzchak. And down in the dark valley that is my father's life as a survivor, my father has decided that I will not exist. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, has defied explanation more than any other passage in the Torah. It is a philosophical singularity. Not even the most learned commentator can satisfactorily explain why God gives Abraham this terrible test. I dare them to try and explain the test my father went through, or on what basis he found hope for the future. But listen. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv, Vayomer avi, Vayomer hineni b'ni. Father, the son asks. Hineni b'ni, I am here, my son. The father answers. Does my father hear me? Does he hear my unconceived voice, calling to him backwards through time? Does it momentarily flash through his consciousness? Is it the arguments of his professor Shaul Lieberman or the Lubavitcher Rebbe, pleading with him that he cannot lead a full Jewish life without a family? Or is the angel who stays my father's hand here with us tonight? Is it my mother who finally returns him to the earthbound preoccupations of the living, to be his partner in life, to care for a next generation and for those in need of an example? Hineni, my father answers. I am here, and in saying it, he decides to live in this world. He marries. He has a child. He continues the compact between generations. Hineni, my father cried loud and clear to us all. I am here. I survived, and I will not be silent. He told the world what he saw and what he feared would come if it did not listen. And I stand before you today as the improbable evidence, a witness that by my very existence affirms my father's unrelenting optimism and hope for our species. His optimism, his hope. Because for someone who had seen the worst, my father tended to see the best in people. He saw the best in me, even when I didn't. He saw the burden that being his son placed on me when I was younger, and he did what he could to lighten it. He saw the best in the Jewish sages in their teachings, even when I didn't. When I challenged him once on some of the Torah's harshest passages, he would say, some parts were for a different time and place. Why not focus instead on the parts that are timeless? And he saw the best in this country. He saw it through the eyes of a survivor rescued by U.S. servicemen, through the eyes of an immigrant who had nothing, who was given a state when he was a stateless person. He loved this country very much. He believed strongly in the role of this museum in broadcasting the dangers of viewing the other with distrust and suspicion. And in his relentless battle for compassion and fair treatment of the other, he acted in keeping with thousands of years of Jewish tradition commemorating the exodus from Egypt. For here is what we are commanded to do over and over and over again. V'ger lo toneh ve'lo tilchatzenu, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. And a stranger shalt thou not wrong, neither shall you oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. V'ger lo tilchatz, v'atem yadatem et nefesh hager, ki gerem hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. A stranger you shall not oppress, for you know the heart of a stranger. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. Kezrach mikem yehilachem hager agar itchem, v'hafta lo kamocha, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. The stranger that travels with you shall be unto you as the homeborn among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Is that clear enough? When Syrian refugees need our help, we must help them. When Muslims in our midst are made to feel that they won't have the same rights as the rest of us, we must embrace them. When children of hard-working and law-abiding undocumented immigrants fear deportation, we must insist on compassion entering into the equation. When women are made to feel that they are objects rather than people, we must teach our daughters that they will never be strangers to the best opportunities this country has to offer. When African American citizens feel they are strangers in the eyes of the law, and policemen feel estranged from the communities in which they serve, we must seek to rebuild that trust in both directions. When the LGBT community feels they are at risk to being terrorized, we must let them know that we are with them. And when the State of Israel is singled out by the United Nations and BDS activists and treated as the world's villain simply for making sure that Jews will never again be without a home, we must let Israel know that they are not a stranger in global politics, but a key player in global democracy. In this museum, whose fundamental premise is that we must never again allow ourselves to condemn the other simply for being the other, is there any question about the scope of the work ahead for all of us in the coming years? And as we do all this, we must note that there is a danger. In seeking to change hearts and minds and create a more tolerant society, there is a danger that we may treat those whose opinions we find offensive as the other in turn. This was not my father's way. He was not a shouter, and he did not belittle those he disagreed with. He spoke to them. He listened. He asked questions, sometimes pointed questions, but more often open-ended ones. He led by example. I think my father would have appreciated two brave young men in the news recently. He would have appreciated that college student Matthew Stevenson invited his controversial white nationalist classmate Derek Black to a Shabbat dinner, and that Derek accepted it and used it as a springboard for personal reflection and evolution. I think he would have appreciated hearing about Jews and Arabs working together in the wake of last week's arsons in Israel's north. I do not think he would have been unfriending people on Facebook, no matter how they voted. But let us go back to Abraham and Yitzchak, my father and me. Thousands of years ago, two men are coming down, back down from the mountain. 5 years ago, my father is telling me that he has cancer. One commentator remarks on the language. The same words are used for the coming and the going. Abraham and Yitzchak walked up to the mountain together, and they walked out together. Their relationship was not defeated by the momentous event they had just undergone. My father and I, too, we loved each other across a gulf of understanding that should have been hard to bridge. He who had everything taken from him as a child, I to whom everything was given. I never found the message he left behind. Maybe that expression of his hopes and dreams was there in his study after all. In the Torah scroll he kept in his office, in the body of Jewish learning of which his spirit has now eternally become a part. I believe that's a part of it. But what I also believe is that each one of you who knew him, who has read his works or heard his speeches, each of you who believe in what he stood for and have your own story, each of you has a part of his message. And when we come together like we do tonight, that message is much clearer. Thank you, Sarah Bloomfield, Tom Bernstein, the museum staff, all of our friends and speakers tonight for remembering my father with our family. My mother, wife, children, and I are all moved by the long and powerful connection between my father and this museum. May his memory be a blessing to us all.
Cantor Joseph Malavani, Fifth Avenue Synagogue, New York.
I am here not only as the cantor of the synagogue, but as a close friend of Ellie, of blessed memory. His favorite melody was to the words of Ani Ma'amin, I believe in the coming of the Messiah. And if the Messiah hesitates a little bit in coming, nevertheless, I believe that he will come soon in our time. Elie was influenced by this composition which he composed, which he sang already as a child in Siget, a town, as, by the way, my late mother was from also. Ani Ma'amin Be'emuna Sheleyema Hay bevias HaMoshiach Ani Ma'amin Be'emuna Shelema Bevias HaMashiach Hayani Ma'amin Be'emuna Shelema Bevias HaMashiach Ve'yafale pi she'yismameyah Hayim kol ze achake Ve'yafale pi she'yismameyah Yachavakeloi Bechol yom sheyavo Ani Ma'amin Be'emuna Shelema Bevias HaMoshiach Ani Ma'amin Be'emuna Shelema Bevias HaMoshiach Hayani Ma'amin Be'emuna Shelema Bevias HaMashiach Ve'yafale pi she'yismameyah Im kol ze achake lo Ve'yafale pi she'yismameyah Yachavakeloi Bechol yom
Sarah Bloomfield, Director, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
Even though I stand here tonight representing this magnificent building, I will not focus on Ellie as the father of this institution. Instead of bricks and mortar, and of course, as you all know, this museum is far more than bricks and mortar, I want to speak about words, the unique power of words. Ellie truly understood that power to tell a story, to touch our soul, to prod our conscience. In fact, in 1973, 5 years before Ellie was appointed by President Carter to lead the President's Commission on the Holocaust, it was Ellie's words that transformed my life as a young school teacher in Sydney, Australia. My students were deeply moved by reading Night, but terribly shocked to learn that I was Jewish, telling me I was too nice to be Jewish. I was too normal to be Jewish. It was my first direct encounter with anti-Semitism, and it provoked a remarkable series of questions and discussions that neither I nor my students were prepared for. I think Ellie would have liked that, because that was the purpose of words and of Holocaust memory, to provoke endless questions. As with Tikkun Olam, the imperative to repair the world, knowing that the job is never finished, questions about the Holocaust must constantly be asked and re-asked, knowing that answers are never possible. 13 years after that teaching experience, in 1986, I found myself here in Washington working for something called the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. And again, it was Ellie's words that helped me understand the extraordinary and inspired vision behind this project to build a living memorial on the National Mall. Over my 30 years here, I have repeatedly referred to Ellie's words in this commission report. For me and for all of my colleagues, these words have been our guide as we aspire every single day to fulfill Ellie's bold vision. At this particular moment in time, the power of Ellie's words, of his singular voice, is felt even more so in his absence. In the troubling events of recent weeks, where the power of words, often hateful words, has been on display in our public discourse, I have longed for Ellie's words. I'm sure I'm not alone. Who will remind us when we are off course? Who will speak truth to power? Who will make sure that today's forgotten victims in faraway places get our attention? Who will use just the right words over and over again to shake us loose from our complacency, help us overcome our own fears, and remind us of the demands of our humanity? Who will be our moral compass, our true north? Ellie, we miss you. We miss your gentle soul, your friendship, your support, and especially we miss your words. Thank you. And of course, it is Ellie's words and moral authority that were the driving force behind this institution, where on that horrible day in July, we lost him. And on that day, this flag flew at half-mast in his honor. It is my great privilege to present it to Marion and the Wiesel family. This concludes our program, but I know the celebration of the remarkable life of this man will go on. Certainly we will live it every day at this institution. Please join me and the Wiesel family for a reception to continue to pay honor to Ellie. Thank you.